Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to talk about how to differentiate a real Leica from a counterfeit. This is a Zorki. It's not a counterfeit Leica. It says Zorki on top. You can see that. The Zorki camera is the most commonly used for counterfeiting Leicas and other cameras like Leicas. So they tend to be the cheapest, the Zorkis. So when someone's going to make a counterfeit Leica, it makes sense for them to start with the cheapest, which is the Zorki. So we've got two real Leicas, these two on the left. I know they're real because they have all of the correct things they're supposed to have and the same construction, the correct construction. So also I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how a counterfeit Leica is made, and then we'll start looking at the difference. And it's not just Leicas, there are even rarer cameras like the Leica that are counterfeited with the Zorkis. There's some American-made ones, some other Japanese ones. I forget most of them, but they look like the Leicas with a shape like this one is a giveaway for one that can be counterfeited. That shape right there is the shape. It's indicative of a camera that can easily be counterfeited with a Zorki. Also on the other side, that general shape can easily be counterfeited with a Zorki. So it seems like it'd be really hard to turn that into a counterfeit Leica. There are a couple of ways that can be done. So the counterfeiters will start by grinding away, one of the ways. They'll start by grinding that out till it's smooth so that they can then engrave on there. So counterfeit Leicas tend to have a thinner top plate than they actually should because that's been ground down to make it smooth for engraving. And stamping metal like that makes it harder to counterfeit because the engraving is done differently than the stamping. So with engrave it, you get a fine drill and cut it out. With those, you just ka-thunk and stamp the metal in, and that makes an impression which also deforms slightly the metal around the impression area. So counterfeiters grind that to uniformity if they're going to do a good job. Another way they can do that is cut the stamped part out and then weld in a new piece or puddle weld over it and then grind it flat. But I'll tell you what, if they have enough skills to do either of those, they should be making their living as a welder, not as a camera counterfeiter. They'll do better. So once they have that flat, then what they'll do is with laser etchers, it's really easy. You just put it under a laser cutter and then you just laser etch the information into the top. It looks like it's supposed to, but it doesn't have the depth of an engraved area. And you can have but with the laser cutter, you can have all of the same information and detail. If you were to machine it, you'd have to have a pantograph, a reducing pantograph, because it's very finely detailed information. And again, if someone has the skills to use a reducing pantograph for engraving, they could make a better living not doing counterfeiting. So let's talk about some of the differences between the Zorki and the Leica IIIB in this case that can't be easily counterfeited, so you can see whether or not at a glance if it's fake. The first one, easy to notice, is the shutter button. The Zorkis have a cable release in the shutter button. The Leicas, at least the B, do not. Some of the later bodies might have added it. I'm not a Leica expert, so I can't recall for sure, but at least the earlier Leica 3 models do not have the shutter release. The Zorki shutter speed dial goes up to 1/500th. The Leica IIIB and laters, they go up to 1/1000th. The screw set plates on the cold shoe there is also different. Now with the Leica, they might be different as well, but double check with photos on the internet. The Leica has 4 screws, the Zorki has 3. And one thing to do when you're checking to see if you have a counterfeit camera is to know the model you're interested in buying well enough and look at verified copies or photos on the internet to compare them to details versus what you want to buy. The B at least has a different window layout than the Zorki rather, but I think there are some of the older Leicas, like maybe the A, have a window layout similar to the Zorki. On the front of the 3B, you can see the knurling around the rewind button is very fine. On the Zorki, it's not nearly as fine. It's much more coarse. Finer knurling is significantly harder to machine than the coarser knurling. While you're looking at the front of the cameras, there's a very obvious difference between the Zorki and the Leica, and that's the slow speed shutter button right there on the front. The Zorki does not. So if your Leica doesn't have a slow speed shutter button, it could be a counterfeit. The screw holes are in roughly the same place except the one with the slow speed shutter dial where that is. And again, also double check. I'm not a Leica expert. I can't tell you if they all have slow speed shutter dials or not. One interesting thing about the Leica is that the texture appears to be embossed into the metal, but with the Leica it's a vulcanite material. And if you look at the Leicas, there's a seam under the lens, so you should be able to see that right there next to my finger. And there's a single piece of vulcanite that was wrapped around the camera, and that's the seam where the two ends of the vulcanite met. On the Zorki, I'll take this lens off here, this gigantic honkin' Jupiter lens, and you can see a little bit more easily there is no seam under the lens. So that's another reason that I think that this is an embossed piece of metal. So I've read that the Zorkis have paper coverings, but I'll tell you what, it doesn't sound or feel like paper. The Leica has strap lugs, the Zorki doesn't. Just ignore that green tape, that's my own mark. And so the Zorki doesn't have the strap lugs. And there are some other minor differences. Oh, for instance, the Leica has a parallax adjustment lever, the Zorki does not. And there are some other differences that are harder to notice, like detailing around the viewfinder lenses there, the specific shape of the corners, things like that, the placement of some of the screws in the front. And then there are some really good similarities. The knurling on the rewind knobs between the two, and same thing on the advanced knobs, are effectively the same. They're very similar. While we have the lens of the Zorki off, let's take the lens off the Leica. Now we're looking inside the Zorki, and take a look at the shape right there of that piece. That lever connects the lens to the rangefinder mechanism. When you focus the lens, that lever is adjusted to adjust your rangefinder. So on the Zorki, it looks like a triangle I draw after about 4 or 5 martinis. That's the shape. Now, if we grab the Leica, it has a substantially different component with better machining. You can see it's a circle, and it looks much, much better. That's a difference that cannot be faked between the two cameras. While we're here with the cameras, let's take a look at the bottom. The bottom has some differences that are worth noting. There are 4 screws on the Leica, and the Zorki has 3 around the tripod bushing. And then there's 2 on the Leica as well by the unlock. The bases are just assembled slightly differently. And similar to the top plate, if somebody wanted to counterfeit it, they'd have to remove that text on the Zorki, which appears engraved, and then re-engrave it or re-laser etch it with the correct German text. So if we open up the bases of the two cameras, they open up the same way, but inside there are differences, and you should be able to see some pretty substantial differences right off the bat. The Zorki has a different style film advance take-up, and they are not, that I know of, interchangeable, though I've never tried. I should have at some point, but I didn't. But at any rate, I don't think it will. But more important than that is the layout. So look at the spring here. There's a more complex layout. There's that spring, some gears, a timing mechanism, and then a couple of adjustment gears, which I believe are used for adjusting shutter speed. Over here, those are some shutter speed adjustment gears. There's none of the other stuff in the middle, a smaller spring and a single gear, but it's much more devoid of anything on the base. And one other really important thing is that if you are looking to buy a Leica, or one of the many clones, especially an expensive one, buy a Zorki before you start investing in them. They're cheap. Buy one that's good for parts. It doesn't matter. If you go to see the camera in person, bring the base of the Zorki with you to put onto the base of the Leica clone. And if it won't fit on, or it almost fit. I take that back. It almost fits. It's very hard to get on. It doesn't want to go on to the Leica. I tried putting it on 3 or 4 times before this video and never got it on. So that's the first time it's fit. It doesn't quite. It's close to the same size, but not quite. So the Zorki base will not fit easily onto a Leica base. So also, if you take a Leica and you want to check to see if it's real, take your Leica base. The Leica base will not even come close to fitting on a Zorki. So the bases are not interchangeable. So if you bring the base of one camera to check out another one in person, you can tell if they fit. Those are the big things to look for between them. There are some other small, more minor differences, like for instance on the Leica, if you look, there are 3 screws on the back versus 2 on the Zorki, 2 on the back of the top, and the Leica 1 on the Zorki. There are some differences like that, but the major things that you should take away from this are that if you want to identify whether a Leica is counterfeit or real, look under the lens at the linkage there. If it's circular, there's a very good chance that it's a Leica. If it's not circular, it's guaranteed not to be a Leica. Next thing you want to look at is the shutter button, whether or not there is a thread, lens release thread, and then look at the underside on the inside to see what the mechanisms look like. Those are the things that it does not matter how good a machinist the camera counterfeiter is. If they're good enough to fake those things, and if they're going to the lengths required to do those things, they could make way, way, way more money doing something that's not counterfeiting Leicas. So at any rate, I can't say this enough. Camera counterfeiting is not something that's being done by super high skilled machinists. It's a low cost of entry to get into making a counterfeit camera that will fool 50% of people. And frankly, you only need one sucker to sell one fake camera. So that is it. That is a real Leica versus a Zorki, and looking at how a Zorki can be converted to make it look like a Leica, and what identifying hallmarks between the Zorki and the Leica exist so that you can tell whether it's fake or not. So if this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track and I'm creating content which is useful to you and helpful. If you have questions or comments, please leave those below. I'm pretty good about checking my comments every day or two. If you want to know more about how to identify fake cameras, let me know. I'm pretty good at helping to answer those questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, please let me know. And if I have this lens, come on lens, Jupiter, oh, please just screw on. Thank you. So if I have the technical know-how and the equipment, I'm more than happy to make those videos for you. And of course, there's one last thing. Thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.